We have a really, really important topic to discuss today. We're going to talk about safety for our children digitally, as well as, just some other really practical ways that if something does happen, how are you as a parent needing to respond? What is the best response? What are some tips and some steps that you can take to really protect your child going forward in the future? So I am super excited to have Kevin Cronister with us today, such a knowledgeable guy. And I'm really, really eager to hear what he has to say. So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast today. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and to be able to share the information.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to do it. I know that you have a lot on your plate, a lot going on, and just a lot of experience and background seeing stuff that I'm sure you wish you didn't. So
Yeah,
I want to start by just helping parents understand that yes, there are dangers and kind of give us some idea of what are some things that parents need to understand. We can't keep our heads in the sand. But then after we kind of lay that out a little bit, I want to move on to what steps do we take to ensure that our kids are safe? But then what happens if something does happen? How do we help them heal and move in that direction? So what are some of the things that you see in the work that you do, that parents really need to be aware of, that maybe we would prefer to gloss over and not really think about stuff that's going on out there?
sure. So anytime I discuss this with parents or anybody in the general public, they're always very shocked at the numbers that I throw out.
Mm,
And for the longest time, law enforcement has kind of operated under this idea that we don't want to talk about this too much because we don't want to panic parents and
right.
we don't want to scare the general public. But I've kind of taken the opposite tact because, in my opinion, you can't fix the problem or address the problem if you don't know that there's a problem.
Right.
And so within my position, as you mentioned before, I'm part of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And through that position, we work closely with NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Mm,
And so annually, they receive tips from all over the country about crimes against children occurring. And then those get filtered down to our task force and distributed to us individually based on our region. And in 2023, NCMEC received 36.2 million
wow.
tips.
Oh my
And,
goodness.
and that was up 300% in certain categories from 2021.
Hmm.
And so it's what I absolutely call an epidemic across our country. And those cyber tips range kind of across a spectrum of crimes. So you've got possession or distribution of child sexual abuse material, which is commonly referred to as child porn, child sex trafficking, obviously cases of molestation, child sex tourism, which is when somebody travels from another country to engage in child prostitution,
Wow.
online solicitation of children, where these guys are chatting with them in different chat rooms or on different social media apps to try to get sexual conversations or images and videos exchanged. And then sexual extortion, what we call sextortion, which actually affects the boys more so than the girls. But it's where an adult will essentially trick a young man into believing he's communicating with a female his age. The young man will exchange a nude photo, and then that nude photo will be used as blackmail, and he'll be
Wow.
instructed to take his parents' credit cards and provide the information to these gentlemen who are pretending to be, a girl this young man's age. And so when people think about crimes against children, a lot of times they think about one specific thing, whether it's child porn or child molestation, but really there's so much more than that out there that's occurring. And with 36 million tips coming
Goodness.
into NCMEC, that's a huge strain on law enforcement too, because there's only so many hours in the day, you
Mm,
know. So it definitely is a problem. But like you said, um, it's not overly complicated to prevent a lot of these things with basic education for your kids and with open communication.
right. Yeah, for sure. And I want to spend a lot of time talking about that, because uh, there's so much that just a like you noted, basic communication, really solid relationships. We want our kids to, when something weird happens,
Hmm.
to immediately feel comfortable coming to us, to not feel like they have to run and hide, because that just prolongs the opportunity for these scumbags to do stuff or to access them. So we talk a lot here at Teach Them Diligently about relationships, about going for hearts. So that would obviously be a first line of defense. Make sure that you have an open line of communication with your kids. Um, Beyond that, what are some of the other tools or strategies that parents really need to know to address this issue or to prepare their kids and themselves and their home? I'm like, a holistic approach to try to protect their kids from any of this stuff happening to them.
Sure. A lot of the suggestions that I give parents are really just common sense things that, most parents probably already know, but it's nice
Mm,
to have the reinforcement, right? So, for example, in my house, we have a rule that you don't get to be friends with anybody on the internet that you're not friends with in real life.
excellent.
And that's a rule that we stick to because I know within my line of work, I go on the internet and I pretend to be a 13-year-old girl all the time.
Yeah.
So there's guys like me who maybe are not doing it for the positive reasons I'm doing it, and they go on and they can pretend to be whoever they want to be.
Right. Right.
And so kids don't actually know who they're communicating with unless it's somebody that they know in real life.
Mm,
And so my kids know that, if they don't know somebody, if they don't spend time with that person in real life, then they don't get to be friends with them on the internet,
yeah.
which is very helpful in terms of controlling who they're communicating with. The second thing that I don't let my kids do is they don't get to participate in any like public chats on the games that they play, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, Fortnite, my youngest loves Fortnite, but the chats can be very toxic.
Right.
And so they don't get to participate on that, on any of the public chats. On Roblox, that's another example that a lot of kids are playing. And predators are using the anonymity of these video games
Mm,
to start the grooming process without ever having to actually meet the child. And so that's a big thing that I tell parents to watch out for is, when I was growing up, for somebody to groom me, they had to live in my neighborhood.
right.
They had to come across me regularly, have physical interaction with me.
Exactly.
And then, they would slowly start the grooming process and work all the way through. But it was in person and it had to happen within the local community, right? Now, the entire grooming process can take place on the internet. And so kids are exposed to the entire world of predators instead of just the predators that maybe live in their communities.
Right.
And so those two rules are really important. The third one is that we don't have screens in any area of the house where I can't walk by
Yeah.
and look over your shoulder and see what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? And those three things are probably the biggest in terms of accountability for the
Hmm.
kids. And then the communication with kids, I explain to my children what the grooming process looks like,
Yeah.
because I want them to know that if they ever do violate a rule and chat with somebody they're not supposed to chat with, I want them to recognize the steps that
Hmm.
somebody is going to try to take them through in order to get them to a place where they'll make an even greater mistake.
Right.
And
Right.
so I teach my kids what the grooming process looks like. Um, and we have very open discussions about things like internet pornography. My 13-year-old right now is going through that struggle because he's 13 and he's going through puberty. And so we have always had a very open communication rule in our house where if you make a mistake, if you come talk to me about it and admit your mistake, there's not going to be any punishment. There's not going to be any, me being upset or what are you thinking? We're going to figure out what happened. We're going to solve
Mm-hmm.
the problem. And then maybe we'll talk about some extra boundaries on devices and stuff in the future. Right. But that
Right.
type of communication to where they feel like they can come to you and say like, hey, I screwed up. I violated our rule. I talked to this guy on the internet and he got me to send him a picture. And now what are
Yeah.
we going to do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and just to kind of follow up on some of the things that you just said, um, how do you tell parents whose children are wanting to exert their independence and like, oh, this, your invasion of privacy and all this stuff, which I'm just eager to hear your take on that. I have my own thoughts.
Sure.
But how do you counsel parents who may struggle with what do I do with this for a young teen? This is hitting even younger than teenagers. This is a huge problem up and down the line. So, but you're going to get that invasion of privacy argument much more from teenagers, young and older teenagers. So
Mhm.
how do you talk to parents about how to overcome that argument with your kids?
Well, I usually tell parents, and I'm sure this is probably, you were smiling when you asked the question, because I'm sure we feel the same way. I told my kids that privacy in my house means you get to go to the bathroom with the door closed. It is not a situation where you get to do things or be involved in things that I don't know about.
Yeah.
And so we do regular device checks where I, at any time, will go pluck that device and be like, hey, let's go through your messages. Let's go through, the history on your phone, who you've been talking
Mm-hmm.
to, that kind of a thing. And obviously that's going to ruffle a teenager's feathers, right? But the more you stick to it and the more consistent you are with it, the more it just becomes one of the things that we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so consistency, I think, is the most important part, because what you don't want is you don't want to do it a few times and then go, months without doing it. And then all of a sudden you do it again. That's going to make the process a lot harder.
Yeah.
And I explained to my kids too that, hey, I understand that you want privacy. We can buy you a journal or a diary. If you want to talk on the phone with your friends, I'm not going to listen into your conversations, right? Like you can have privacy in those ways.
Right.
But when it comes to the internet and those types of dangers, privacy is really kind of off the table.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. What another thing that, we always, or I always talk to my kids, David did too, I'm sure, was this isn't about invading your privacy. If I'm scanning through Instagram conversations, it's not because I'm reading every word. I am scanning through. I'm making sure that I know the parties. I'm spot checking, if there's a group of guys talking, I'm spot checking that
Yeah.
because guys can be really dumb and they can say stupid things and there's a lot of teachable moments in there, but it's not out of a heart to just trap you. It is out of a heart to keep you safe and
Yes.
to make sure that there's accountability. We would tell them your dad and I have accountability with each other for the same reason, not because we don't trust each other or expect there to be horrible things, but because in openness and in accountability, there is safety. And so we wanted to make sure that our kids knew that as well. As you are doing those checks though, or a parent listening in, as they're doing those checks though, let's suppose that they do find something that, shocks them, scares them, freaks them out, whatever.
Mhm.
What would you say to a parent whose child has been victimized in it to whatever extreme? What would your words be of counsel be to them, so that we don't react in a way that is going to make the situation even worse?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I'm glad that you asked that, because I've kind of come up with a list of like the top 10 things that I
Mm.
want parents to know that they should do if their child is victimized. Because my goal is twofold as a detective. The first is to obviously make sure that your child is safe, and that they are no longer in any danger. But the second is to use that as a way to put the predator in jail so that there are no further incidents of
Yeah.
this. And so I can't tell you the number of cases that have been uh, kind of not ruined, but uh, it's been a little bit more difficult because of well-meaning parents
Yeah.
who have thought they were doing the right thing when they actually kind of made it harder. So the number one rule that I tell parents is don't panic, and it's easier said than done, right?
Mm.
But if your child, using the example of maybe like an electronic solicitation type of a situation where they became friends with somebody that they didn't really know, and this person got them to send an inappropriate photograph. Um, that photograph has already been sent, right? You can't take it back, and your child is still in your home, physically safe. So don't panic. The worst thing that you can do is elevate and get upset, because then your child is going to start to blame themselves, right? They're going to feel like that, like we talked earlier, the positive open communication is kind of dashed when you elevate and you start getting
Right.
upset with them over something
Right.
like this. So try not to panic, and gather some information about what happened. Um, the second thing is to take their phone and put it onto airplane mode. So a lot of parents don't have a great grasp of internet connectivity and technology. It even as a detective who deals with this all the time, there's always new technology that's coming out that I don't understand, and so it's a constant educational process for everybody. But when you put a cell phone on airplane mode, what that does is it cuts it off from the network.
Mm.
So if you take your phone right now and you put it into airplane mode, it'll cut it off from the network, and that phone will stay in that state, whatever state it was when you put it into airplane mode, until you take it off of airplane mode. And that's a good thing, because when you put it into airplane mode, that means that nobody outside of that phone can manipulate the data. Okay.
Okay.
So I've had instances in the past where bad guy has been able to use login information of the child to remotely wipe phones, or to
Mm.
delete evidence,
Wow.
or to recall messages, that kind of a thing. But when your phone is in airplane mode, it's basically in its own little bubble. And so
Mm.
he can delete everything he wants out here, but it doesn't penetrate that bubble. That phone will stay preserved in the state that it was in when you took it from your child.
Okay.
So cut off the internet, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
put it into airplane mode.
So do
Uh,
you also need to turn off the Wi-Fi to the phone too, assuming that there's Wi-Fi coming to it?
so when you put it into airplane mode, it does all of
It
that
takes
for
all of
you.
it up. Okay.
Yep.
Excellent.
So there is no connectivity to anything outside of the physical hardware of the phone.
Okay.
Um, so that's incredibly important, because if, let's say they communicated over Snapchat, and those photographs disappear after a
Right.
certain period of time,
Right.
right? So you take the phone and you don't put it on airplane mode, and then you bring it to me 8 hours later, all of that might be gone. But if you
Yes.
put it on airplane mode, it'll be preserved as evidence. So,
Hmm.
and then the third thing that I ask parents to do is take screenshots.
Okay.
So you put it into airplane mode, and then you start screenshotting the messages. And what that does is that preserves the evidence in a way that I can very easily pull those pictures out, upload them into the case file, and I've got it laid out nice and neat. But it also prevents, if you accidentally reconnect to the internet somehow and all that stuff gets deleted, now we still have the pictures. So it's
Hmm.
kind of a backup to the backup, right? So that we're not accidentally losing evidence. Number 4 is do not block the suspect.
Which is your first response. That's the first thing that you want to do.
Yes, happens all the time. A majority of my cases, parents will say, "Here's the phone. I blocked the suspect." And again, well-meaning, right?
Right.
Like, this guy victimized my kid. I'm cutting
Want
him
him as
off.
far away as possible.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely. So it's a very valid response. But when you block somebody on any social media app, it completely deletes all of the communication between your child
Really?
and that person. Yep.
Wow.
So any social, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, if they've been communicating and you block that person, it completely purges all of those messages and images and videos,
Mm.
which obviously is problematic because then unless you've taken screenshots, we now don't really have anything to go off of, and I don't
Yeah.
have any evidence to pursue. The fifth one, and this one is for my dads. Do not contact the suspect yourself.
Oof.
Um,
Oof.
Trust me. Uh, if I could just cut dads loose and let them handle business, I absolutely would at times because I'm a father of 4 with a 5th that we're getting ready to adopt. I understand I understand the reaction of I'm going to tell this guy what's what.
Right.
But when you do that, you tip them off that the gig is up,
Mm.
and they immediately start deleting all of their stuff.
Backpedaling everything,
Yep.
cleaning it up. Yeah.
Yep. Coming up with, rationalizations for why they were behaving that way, potentially figuring out alibis and ways they can get
Yeah.
around, law enforcement. And then once they start deleting data off their phone, it's incredibly difficult for me to recover that.
Mm.
Because after I look at your child's phone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a search warrant and I'm going to go seize bad guy's phone once we identify who he is.
Yeah.
So the less he knows, the better, because I want his phone to be in as close to the same state as possible as well.
Yeah.
So as satisfying as it is to tell them what's what, don't contact the suspect yourself. I've even had a dad who went and physically tried to find the individual,
Oh, goodness.
which, from a safety standpoint is kind of a scary deal. You never know what's going to happen. So
Right.
um, number 6 is give me access to the phone. Believe it or not, that privacy concern. Some parents have in the past told me, well, I don't even know my child's passcode because I want them to have privacy. And so I'm not going to force them to give it to you. If they want to, they can. I'm not going to force them to. And what child is going to be like, oh, yeah, you can look through my phone, detective?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and without that phone, we're kind of beat. We don't
Wow.
have, we don't have the evidence that we need. And I can do search warrants for social media websites. Snapchat, if I do a search warrant to Snapchat, sometimes they can produce the conversation for me away from the devices,
Hmm.
but not all the time. And if bad guy has gone in and deleted everything,
Right.
then your child's phone may be the only place where the conversation in its entirety is still there.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me ask you a question real quick on
yes,
on
please.
this kind of as far as we've gone so far. You've talked a lot about, the bad guy being tipped off, cleaning stuff up, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Is there, have you seen any indication that if a child goes quiet for an extended period of time, that red flags the bad guy, so that he starts cleaning stuff up? So I guess at the heart of that question is is it really, really important to be timely, to be on this, get this process moving forward, as painful and scary as it is, because it could possibly tip him off if the child goes quiet?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Especially if they've communicated regularly
Right.
over the course of a month, and he understands your child's schedule and when they usually text and when they don't text. That's a very good point. So yeah, the timeliness is important, and it's important for that reason, but it's also important for any follow up investigation that we're going to do. Um, when it comes to judges and the legal system, the fresher the information, the easier it is for me to get search warrants and subpoenas
Yeah.
and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So no, that's a very good point. And just as an aside, a lot of times, if you're timely enough with bringing us the phone, we can then do what's called an account takeover, and we can pretend to be your child and
Okay.
communicate with the bad guy, which is incredibly helpful because sometimes we can set up a place to meet, and then they can go into custody right then and there,
Quick. Right.
because they think that they're meeting your child. And so, yes, timeliness is incredibly important.
Okay. Good, good, good. That was something that as you were talking, I assumed that it was, but I wanted to
Sure.
make sure that we talked about it because to me that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Get that process moving forward to give you guys, law enforcement, the best possible chance at catching this guy.
Yeah. Well, and
So,
from a psychological standpoint, the quicker we can start this process, the quicker we can get resources to your
yeah,
child if there's been some kind of a psychological impact. And there almost always is, some
I'm
kind of
sure.
emotional, counseling or something that goes along with this, because your child is going to feel a little bit of shame at getting
Uh,
caught up in something, and
yep.
you want to make sure that they process that correctly, so that it becomes a situation where they recognize that it was, a mistake, but they don't blame themselves for that mistake,
Right.
because
They can't be defined by that because that will
yes,
keep them from moving forward, getting out of it. Again, it's so important that you parent your children well through this and that you stay really close to them so that you can avoid the emotional, uh, avoid allowing the emotional damage to take root. Like help
yes,
them go through it, get to the other side, and get on with their lives without allowing that moment in time to be a defining moment that and giving it more power than it should have long term.
absolutely,
All
absolutely,
right. So number 7, where do we go
yes.
next?
So if you have parental controls set up on the phone, disable those,
Hmm.
um, before you give us the phone, because those parental controls a lot of times are set up to limit screen time, to prevent access to certain applications, and to prevent the downloading of new software or new apps to the phone. And usually, when we need to do a forensic examination of the phone to preserve all of the data, it has to install something on the phone. It uninstalls it afterwards, but
Right.
it has to install it to begin with to
Yeah.
pull all that data off of the phone. And if parental controls are on, it'll block the installation of the software. And it might just shut the phone down on me because it says, well, you've reached your screen time
Yeah.
limit for the day. And then I don't have any access to the phone. So disable parental controls. And again, that just goes back to the timely, issue that we were talking about before, because if I end up getting locked out of the phone, then I got to come meet you again, and we got to figure out how to disable the controls anyway. So it
Yeah.
just kind of saves us some time in the long run.
Okay.
And then number 8 is, set up an interview for your child. Um, when your child's victimized, usually they're going to go through potentially 2 different types of interviews. They'll go through the initial interview where I show up, and I usually show up dressed just like this. I'm not wearing all the big scary gear and they're with the radio attached to
Yeah.
my ear, and
Hmm.
we'll sit down and I'll do what's called a basic fact gathering interview. We're not going to go super in depth, but we're going to just gather the basics that I need to move forward with the investigation. After that, they're going to have the opportunity to do, some kind of a forensic interview with a specialist that, is trained to interview children who have been victimized, within this realm.
Okay.
So here, where I'm from, in the Kansas City metro area, we have the Sunflower House, and usually when kids go to the Sunflower House, they go to a room that has a bunch of couches and it's got toys and snacks, and it's a very soft environment. And then the forensic interviewer will come in and sit down and do, a very, child centered interview, that is designed to um, mitigate the emotional impacts that you and I were talking about just a minute
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So that's always optional. It's always optional for you to talk to the police, and it's always optional for you to do these interviews. And I've had a couple parents in the past who have said, "Look, you've already talked to them. I don't want them to have to relive it another time. We're not going to do the forensic interview." And I understand where they were coming from.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think it has the opposite effect because the forensic interview is going to give them the chance to work through a lot of that with a trained
Mm.
professional, right? Um, and when I ask questions, it's very much centered on the investigation, right?
Okay.
It's I need to gather these specific facts so that I can go after bad guy. I'm going to put your child with somebody who is not that I'm not child centered, but whose focus is
On
on the
on the
child and
healing. Yeah.
yes, and gathering the information from them
Okay.
in a more detailed way, but in a way that starts that healing process.
Okay.
And so that particular interview is very important.
So, it as a parent, if you discover this, who do you call? Do you call your local police department? Is there a special? Where do you even turn for something like this?
That's a great question. Um, just call 911.
Okay.
So you call 911 and you say, "Hey, my child has been victimized. We found messages on their phone. They sent an inappropriate image to this individual, and we've got the phone. We would like to talk to an officer."
Okay.
And usually, what will happen is they'll send a patrol officer who is going to be in the uniform with all the gear. And he will show up, and he really will do nothing more than secure the phone, bring the phone to a detective,
Hmm.
and maybe ask the parents some questions. But they really shouldn't be pursuing the investigation with the child.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then a detective will do the follow up.
Okay. I see. And the officer who would come to the house, would he or she be abreast of the things that you have told us here as far as airplane mode and taking off
Hopefully,
the parental controls? And so ideally they could, if you forget all the stuff that you've heard in this conversation, they should be informed and help guide you through some of these steps, ideally.
hopefully, yes.
Okay.
And we try to communicate with them regularly to make sure that the new patrol officers understand
Yeah.
how to handle these types of situations and what to do with devices and that kind of a thing. And just as a kind of an aside, with the devices, if you have the opportunity to plug it in
Mm.
so that the battery's at 100% when we get the device, that's also very helpful because there's without getting super technical there your phone is always in one of two modes. It's in either before unlock first unlock mode or after first unlock mode. What that means is if your phone dies or is shut off and we turn it back on, it's in before first unlock mode, which limits the amount of data we can pull off the phone.
Okay.
But if it is still on and fully charged, and then we go and do the forensic examination, and it hasn't been turned off between when the
When
event
this all
occurred
happened, yes.
and when we get the phone, then it's in after first unlock mode because your child has already put in the passcode
Okay.
and unlocked the phone, and then we can get substantially more data off of the phone.
Okay.
So I always tell people that as well because it's helpful if you could just throw it on the charger. We had the reason I brought that up is because we've had patrol officers who were well meaning, but they thought, I'll just turn the phone off and then it'll preserve everything for the detective, right?
Right.
And then we've lost some of the data. So
Okay.
you brought up the patrol officers knowing what to do. And I was like, well, actually, not always, but so yeah. So if you can charge it, that's great. That's very helpful.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. All right, number nine.
Yep,
We're
just two
getting near
more.
the end of your tips
Yep,
here.
just two more. So number 9 is encourage your child to cooperate with the district attorney's office. Um, it's really difficult for kids to have to get up on the stand
Hmm.
and face the accuser
Hmm.
because in the United States, the accuser has the right to face or excuse me, the suspect has the right to face the accuser.
Yeah.
And so the courts have said that, like, as difficult as it is, there's times where the child is going to have to get on the stand and testify to things in the same room with the person that victimized
Mm.
them. And it's incredibly difficult. But they assign a victim advocate who is specially trained in advocating for child victims to basically walk with them, hold their hand step by step through the whole process. In more serious situations where they deemed that the impact of testifying was just going to be so damaging psychologically to the child, they've allowed the child to maybe get their testimony in through somebody else.
Okay.
So uh, they could explain all of that to me, and then I could testify that I heard this from the child or that
Directly
kind of thing.
from, right.
So there are ways, if it becomes like a serious issue of like mental health, which it can absolutely.
Mm.
But just encourage your child to cooperate and just let them know that uh, it's really not a big deal. I mean, it seems like it is at the time, but the reality is that by getting up there and doing your part in exposing what happened, um, it doesn't seem like it at the time, but that's how that healing that we discussed earlier starts. Because once that person goes to jail and is held accountable, then you have the opportunity to really kind of reflect on what happened and kind of start that healing process. And so it's
Yeah.
important, it's important that they kind of do their part with the court system.
Okay.
So, and then the very last one is a website that I want them to visit called takeitdown.com. So takeitdown.com. That's a website that is operated by NCMEC. And if your child has sent pictures, inappropriate pictures, or, you know, exchanged photos with
Mm.
somebody or been sextorted, this is a website where you can work with NCMEC to get those images and those videos taken down off the internet.
Mm.
So for decades, the idea has been like, well, once it's on the internet, it's out there forever. But there are some initiatives now to figure out ways to remove. As technology gets better, we
Okay.
can start to kind of remove some of those things. And so that's always the kids are always happy to hear that.
Oh,
Obviously, that
yes.
there's a chance we can get all that removed.
Okay.
Um, and so that website is one that I always give. Um, and just know that there's a chance too that um, a family is entitled to financial compensation
Mm.
for the pain and the trauma that the child went to. Which obviously, it's not about the money, but it's about being able to hold somebody accountable for what they
Right.
did.
Right.
And so you can work with the district attorney's office to facilitate some financial compensation, hopefully to maybe help with counseling or resources or that kind of a thing. So,
Gotcha. Well, Kevin, these have been incredibly helpful. And I will make sure that in the show notes, I give some bullet points to really help reinforce these points for the families. I know that you have in some of the information that you sent us, you recommended some additional resources, Kids Digital Health Hub and Guardian Training Solutions. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how they are there to help families as well?
sure. So, the Kids Digital Health Hub is an initiative that I'm one of the partners on. And essentially, we've created a website where all of the resources that you would need as a parent are in one place. And our goal
Okay.
is to try to create a community where parents and law enforcement can kind of work together, communicate better, share resources to try to prevent, child sexual abuse from
Hmm.
occurring. And then on the website is also a link to my podcast, which is the Screen Guardians podcast. And it's more information, just like I shared today. But we go through some of the cases I'm dealing with, and specific case studies and how parents can avoid very specific issues, and we kind of get a little bit more nitty gritty with the details.
Okay.
And so it's a good another resource for parents to listen to. And then lastly, Guardian Training Solutions is my law enforcement training business. So if you happen to be a law enforcement officer and you're listening to the podcast, go visit guardiantrainingsolutions.com, and we've got in-person and online courses that will maybe be able to help you investigate these types of things
Great.
more successfully.
Right, right. No, that is fantastic. I will make sure that every one of these links is in the show notes, because I suspect that every family who has listened in is going to want to dive in deeper, get more help, listen to your podcast. So I'll make sure that that is linked there as well, and just try to get this information into the parents' hands in a way that will be memorable and that they will, think to act on it if the time ever presents itself where it's really needed. So I really, really appreciate your taking the time to share all of this with us today, Kevin. It's been enlightening and just really, really helpful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Homeschool parents are near and dear to me because we homeschool our kids also. And so,
Awesome.
it's such a wonderful community, and there's so much support in the community that I think that, it kind of takes a village. And so hopefully this information can get passed around the homeschool community, and we can prevent some of these things from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. We will do our best to make sure lots and lots of people hear it. So
Great.
again, thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. It has been just a joy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Well, and the rest of you, I am confident that this has been a really helpful episode for you. I hope that you will take Kevin's words and advice and counsel seriously. I hope that you will take the time to write these things down. Listen to this podcast again. Make notes. Have a notebook where, if something happens, you've got a resource. When everything in your head is like frantic, you're able to actually go back, remember exactly what he talked about, and act that way so that you can preserve that evidence. You can really help your child move past it, and hopefully help law enforcement find the bad guy who was actually after your child. So I will just make sure you check those show notes, check out those websites and podcasts that we're linking there. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.